Hello, Gary Stearman again. Time for another Prophecy in the News Daily update. And as promised, with me in studio, we have Tom and Chris. That would be Tom Horn and Cris Putnam. They have written this book called Exo Vaticana. Of course, they wrote Petrus Romanus. I think this one may very well eclipse the last one because it talks about something that's almost unbelievable when you first hear about it. Right, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can also say that the pre-orders for that book are probably 2 to 3 times as much as they were for Petrus Romanus last year. So the public is very intrigued with what we have to say about that. Yeah, the book came out last year, Petrus Romanus. We did shows with you and elsewhere. But everybody kept asking us this question, but what about the Vatican ET connection?
Yes.
Now, why is the Vatican spokesperson, why are there astronomers, why are they out there talking now about aliens and alien life and how this may or may not be accommodating to the authority of the Roman Catholic Church? Well, we wanted to get to the bottom of that question, so we started a new investigation that ultimately resulted in this book, Exo Vaticana. But it started by Chris and I going to Arizona to the top of Mount Graham, where the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope exists, because we wanted to talk to the Jesuit astronomers who were making these comments and who were studying deep space to find out where in the world is this coming from and what do you think it means?
You know, I can see the big CinemaScope production right now. Tom and Chris driving across the Arizona plains, coming up to a huge mountain topped by an unbelievable and secret telescope where things are going on. And you guys actually made this trip with Vatican permission. You went up to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona, and I'll bet our audience, most of our audience, does not know that the Vatican is super interested in what they can see as they look into the heavens, and namely alien presence drawing closer and closer to planet Earth. Leading me to ask the question, Chris, is the Vatican being driven by the whole alien mythos?
Well, yeah, I think there's absolutely really powerful evidence suggesting that's true. I mean, there's some really obvious things, like they hosted an astrobiology conference in Rome in 2009, inviting the top secular scientists in the world. I mean, we're talking about atheists, you know, not Catholics, people that advocate, you know, belief in other worlds and alien intelligences, some of the top figures in the field. But you know, I found something that I find a little more intriguing, in that I think that it's perfectly coherent to argue that UFO sightings have actually driven certain tenets of Catholic theology. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of people are familiar with the famous Fatima, Portugal, miracle of the sun, they call it.
Yes.
Well, if you read the descriptions, what people saw was a silvery disc in the sky. Okay, or some people saw an opaque sphere, they say, that was throwing out rainbows of colors. You know, it really could not be the sun. You know, if the sun were to dance in the sky, the gravitational forces alone would destroy the earth probably. And the only people that saw this were in Fatima. So if it was the sun, they would have been seen worldwide. So obviously it's not the sun, but they see this disc dancing in the sky. They associate this with the visions of these children who say they're channeling Mary. But the only people that know about Mary are just like 2 or 3 people. The rest of the people see a disc. It really sounds like a flying saucer. Now, what's really more interesting is 33 years later, Pope Pius XII, he was thinking about defining a new doctrine that all Catholics must believe. And this is the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary. And what that means is they believe that Mary ascended into heaven just like Jesus does in the beginning of Acts, okay?
Yes.
Now, there's nothing about this in the Bible. Right. We would ever expect that Mary has been kind of deified by the Catholic Church. And, you know, there's some legends that go back to maybe 300 AD where people thought this, but nobody really took it that seriously. But the Pope had a UFO sighting over the Vatican Gardens in Rome in 1950, where he saw an opaque sphere dancing in the sky above Rome. Okay, and from this, he's inspired to define this doctrine and to promulgate it as a belief that all Catholics have to believe. So quite literally, a UFO sighting inspired an official church doctrine.
Now, back to Mount Graham. And when you both ascended Mount Graham, you were ascending a mountain that is considered sacred by Native American tribes in the region. It is considered to be a holy place. Somehow the Vatican got permission. Maybe they didn't, but they whether they got permission or whether they just basically went up there and started building, they built a first-rate astronomical facility, which includes 3 telescopes, one of which has a most interesting name.
Yeah, well, there's the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope. Right next to that is a radio telescope. We went to all 3 of these that day. And then there is the Large Binocular Telescope, or the LBT. It is the largest one of its kind in the world as of this moment. And inside of it, they have a special device that they have put into place called the Lucifer device. That's the acronym, the Lucifer device, but it is actually named after the devil. And it uses infrared technology to, well, first of all, to search the deepest recesses of space and time, but also to be able to see things that the other telescopes cannot see. And I couldn't help the day that we were there talking to the systems engineer who was explaining how Lucifer, which he occasionally would lovingly refer to as Lucy, but Lucifer, how that device is used to see things other telescopes can't see. And I couldn't help but think that when another Jesuit by the name of Malachi Martin was once asked on the radio by Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM in the 1990s, hey, Father Martin, why is the Vatican so interested in the study of deep space at the top of Mount Graham in Arizona? And his answer created a firestorm, really, in the ufological community, because he said this. He said, because at the highest levels of the government of Rome, they know what is approaching the earth, and that it will be of the greatest import in future years. So literally, they're using the instrumentation on the top of Mount Graham, according to Jesuit Malachi Martin, to study something that is approaching the earth, and they're using a device they named Lucifer to do it. Now, the Apache Indians, very quickly, also had concerns because that's one of their 4 holiest mountains, and in our terminology, they view that as what we would call a stargate. It goes back into their history, it goes back into their mythos, beginning with a giant silvery disc that descends from heaven with a bearded man who's a creator, and then another person comes through the portal that's a dragon, but he looks like a man, and he's a deceiver. There's alien gray-like creatures and owl-like beings that are evil omens. So we're really talking here about what would be a ufological hotspot that the Vatican selectively chose to put their telescope on the top of for astrobiological reasons, for the study of deep space.
And Tom and I were talking earlier, and I said it reminds me of Mount Hermon, which is north of Israel, which is called a gateway to the gods. Basically, in fact, going all the way back to the book of Enoch, the renegade angels descended down to the top of Mount Hermon. There was kind of a portal opened there, apparently, and they established their base there. Mount Graham,
yeah, well,
a similar mountain.
And very quickly, let me just say, it's interesting you bring up Mount Hermon, because when we asked Guy Cosmonalgo, who is one of Rome's leading astronomers that splits his time between Mount Graham and another telescope that they have in Rome, what are the alien saviors that they're talking about that are going to be coming here in evidently the not too distant future, he pointed us to Genesis 6 and referred to those very same fallen angels that came down in the days of Jared on Mount Hermon, which of course gave birth to the Nephilim, and he even referred to the Nephilim as the kind of savior angels we can expect to come, savior aliens that we can expect to come in the near future to help us with our understanding of God.
So, Chris, they're looking for an epiphany of sorts, a new exposure, a new access to God, perhaps we could call it. What's your sense of how close all these things are?
Well, you know, it's interesting. At that astrobiology conference hosted in Rome by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, one of the top astrobiology researchers at the University of Arizona, who operates right there at Mount Graham, Dr. Chris Impey, in his speech, it was the keynote address of the Vatican conference, he said that, this was in 2009, he said, we expect that within a few short years, we'll have a very important announcement. So he really implied that in 3 years, from 2009, that they thought that there would be some sort of disclosure.
Wow. Well, allow me to just make the case for our side. And I'll tell you what I'm expecting. I'm expecting the voice of the Lord, the trumpet voice of the Lord shouting, "Come up hither," and millions of Christians will be resurrected, given glorified bodies in what we call the rapture of the church. Tom, that is our blessed hope. And we know that the world is going to go in another direction. It's going to follow what appears to be the truth, with signs, lying wonders, miracles, fire coming down from heaven. I don't think we're going to be there when that happens, right?
Yeah, I don't either. And all of what we're talking about really is a fulfillment of prophecy. It is those signs and lying wonders. It's a great setup. And the mouthpieces for the Vatican may not even understand the hands that they are playing into and the role that they may play in the form of a great deception.
Chris, any further thought?
Well, when the rapture does occur and all these people go missing, I mean, there needs to be an explanation from the other side.
Yeah.
And, what better than some sort of alien invasion? In fact, Hollywood has already primed the pump with movies like Knowing, where they actually show that.
Absolutely. And that's a good thought. I'm glad you added that. Well, gentlemen, wish we had more time. Tom, come more often, will you?
Well, I'll try to, Gary. Thank you.
And Chris, the door is always open to you. I love what you're doing. You guys are sort of under a kind of conviction to get these things done as quickly as possible. I know that. And the way information has fallen together, almost in a supernatural way, you feel kind of a divine unction to get these things out the door and into the hands of the people, right?
Absolutely. It's our pleasure to serve this role as well.
Come again. And by the way, I'm Gary Stearman, and I just like to say what I always do. And I don't say it just to be cute, but rather I say it because I believe it. Keep looking up, everybody.
Two to three times as much as they were for Petrus Romanus last year. So the public is very intrigued with what we have to say about that. The book came out last year, Petrus Romanus. We did shows with you and elsewhere. But everybody kept asking us this question, but what about the Vatican ET connection?
Yes.
Now, why?
Horn and Cris Putnam. They have written this book called Vaticana. Of course, they wrote Petrus Romanus. I think this one may very well eclipse the last one because it talks about something that's almost unbelievable when you first hear about it, right, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can also say that the pre-orders for that book are probably
Hello, Gary Stearman again. Time for another Prophecy in the News Daily update. And as promised, with me in studio, we have Tom and Chris. That would be Tom Horn.
But it started by Chris and I going to Arizona to the top of Mount Graham, where the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope exists, because we wanted to talk to the Jesuit astronomers who were making these comments and who were studying deep space to find out where in the world is this coming from, and what do you think it means? He is the Vatican spokesperson. Why are there astronomers? Why are they out there talking now about aliens and alien life and how this may or may not be accommodating to the authority of the Roman Catholic Church? Well, we wanted to get to the bottom of that question, so we started a new investigation that ultimately resulted in this book, Vaticana.